I'm now on Herin Street, which is basically the street where all the atas, or well-to-do babas and nyonyas used to live in the olden days. And I know that these houses over here don't look very grand by modern standards, but in the past they were considered to be enormous. Now these tiles are the same tiles that were used over 100 years ago. This is an abandoned Peranakan mansion. Yeah, you can still see some of the decor on the doorway. On the door, there seems to be some, some dragon-like carvings up there, if I'm not mistaken. I can't read Chinese, and I bet the fellas who put these signs up couldn't read Chinese either. They just did it in order to seem more civilized, so to speak. Yes, during colonial times, the babas and nyonyas wanted to be Chinese again all of a sudden, especially with a rising China. But these same tiles were used by my grandmother's family in her own house in Penang. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Hope everyone's having an amazing day. If you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should also be having an amazing day. Now I'm walking along Herin Street, which used to be a bustling Baba Nyonya enclave in its heyday. But as you can see, most of these houses, these Peranakan houses, have either been abandoned or have been converted into hotels, restaurants, and tourist traps, basically. The implied message seems to be that the Baba Nyonyas have now become an extinct people, but I'll let you in on a little secret. We're still here, except that I can't afford to live in my own ancestral house now, that's for sure. How the mighty Peranakan has fallen. Now back in the day, before our fall from greatness, so to speak, Herin Street used to be like the Gangnam of Malacca. It was where all the rich folks used to live. And in fact, Tan Cheng Lok's house is somewhere around here. Sorry if I'm not directly looking at the camera, because I'm watching out for cars as well, yeah? It's a very bloody narrow street, and back then they didn't have motor cars, so you could quite safely walk in the middle of the road, but times change. So yeah, this street is where Sir Tan Cheng Lok, the most famous Baba man and the first leader of the Malaysian Chinese Association, lived actually. His ancestral house is somewhere here, although I've yet to locate it. By today's standards, these houses are pretty and quaint, but by no stretch of the imagination grand when you can compare them to the bungalows of Seramas or Kenny Hills. But back then they were considered enormous. Believe it or not, back then these houses were considered enormous, considering that most people lived in makeshift atap houses, or most people lived in cramped conditions. If you were a migrant worker from China, you would be sharing a room with 4 or 5 other people. So living in a shop house like this, having a room of your own, was considered a luxury, even though houses back then, until the mid-20th century, most houses didn't even have air conditioning. But you know, times change, and people's expectations become bigger over time. People get more pampered. About a week ago, members of our community were celebrating because the Malaysian government has finally acknowledged us as a separate category from the wider Malaysian Chinese diaspora. And so, from our point of view, we are delighted because our identity is finally being acknowledged as distinct and unique from the broader Malaysian Chinese category. Now, if we're going to talk about the fallout of this recognition, there are certainly some people in the Malaysian Chinese community who might not be too happy, because they might feel that this is a divisive move in order to divide the Malaysian Chinese community. Others in the Peranakan community may also feel, well, more comfortable identifying as Malaysian Chinese. Personally, I don't, because I think the Malaysian Chinese category contains plenty of baggage that I can't support in good conscience. But you know, to each his own. Everyone has their own point of view. So starting this year, Peranakans, Baba Nyonyas from Malacca may start changing their identity status to Baba and Nyonya. Oh, this is the Peranakan Association of Malacca. Seems they're not open today, but yes. But in the rest of the country, they can start changing next year in 2026. So, you know, everyone's got their own perspective. Some people are celebrating, while others are doubtful. Some even have mixed feelings, you know, because they wonder, how are we going to define if someone is truly a Baba or a Nyonya? How do we know that we don't have imposters sneaking in? Basically, you know, people pretending to be Baba and Nyonya. I mean, my face doesn't lie. I don't have a typical Han Chinese face, that's for sure. And my skin complexion doesn't lie either. But, you know, a concern that many people have is also that will actual Babas and Nyonyas be disqualified from this category? Don't get me wrong, I am very grateful, Maniak Kamsia, to the Malaysian government for finally recognizing my category as unique and distinct, and recognizing my own cultural autonomy to identify myself as a Baba rather than a Chinese Malaysian, which feels like an ill-fitted shirt, frankly. I despise Chinese New Year music almost as much as I despise Yisak. Ugh, disgusting stuff. Anyway, not to insult the Chinese Malaysian culture, of course, but Chinese Malaysian has always felt like an ill-fitted shirt. So finally, I mean, we get a category of our own, which is good. But having said that, I mean, there are people who feel that this is a rather divisive sort of move because, as you know, our country isn't united in terms of races. We're still a very polarized country, full of distrust among communities. So there are valid concerns that this move might be perceived as elevating the Baba and Nyonya community over the wider Malaysian Chinese community. And certainly I can see in the fallout that ensues, there might indeed be feelings of resentment if we start to gloat about our own uniqueness. And there may be indeed feelings of resentment towards our community if we're not careful, we're not tactful how we handle this. Now, when I say that I'm Peranakan, not Malaysian Chinese, okay, I despise Chinese New Year music, but still, it doesn't mean that I think I'm superior to you. It doesn't mean that I hello, hi, hi. Hi, how are you? Doesn't mean I think I'm superior to you, but it does mean that I see the world a different way from you. Okay, so at the end of the day, what's most important is that we're still Malaysian, yeah? Now, I have to repeat that just because the Babas and Nyonyas are elated that they're finally being recognized as an independent category from the wider Malaysian Chinese diaspora, it doesn't mean that we're elevating ourselves above you, yeah? The Malaysian Chinese have made enormous contributions, not only economically, but politically, socially, and culturally as well. In fact, they have contributed greatly to the development of the Baba and Nyonya identity. Now, as you know, they have played an enormous role in the development of the organic Penang Baba Nyonya culture. Personally, whether you want to learn Hokkien or not, even it's up to you. I personally would rather learn Baba Malay, but you know, Chinese Malaysians have also contributed in terms of, you know, providing us with essential things that we take for granted, like for example, affordable hawker food, car mechanics when we need our cars fixed, as well as aquarium shops, and so on and so forth. So without the Chinese Malaysians, Malaysia would be a vastly different place, and your contributions are very, very much appreciated. Now, personally, I have no interest in learning Hokkien. It was certainly not passed down to me from my grandparents because, well, they didn't think it was of any importance, since, you know, English is the lingua franca of business, commerce, and science and technology in our country, right? And Malay is the language of governance. So they didn't think it was that important for the survival of the Peranakan identity, since Hokkien was basically, it's more of like a linguistic condiment that you add to your broth, but the base of the broth is Malay still, right? So it's a condiment you might put on, but I personally choose not to put on this topping because I don't really like the sound of it, if I'm very honest. I much prefer the melodious and poetic sound of Malay rather than the guttural sound of Hokkien. Still, even though you could argue that the Penang Babas have become a bit more cynicized, I'm not questioning their authenticity, yeah? Don't get me wrong. In fact, I think that they developed organically, and their development is something that did not happen by force. So it happens through intermarriage, through cultural osmosis. So just, you know, just I'm going to basically study Baba Malay and master it. But if you want to learn Hokkien, go ahead. Not putting anyone down for learning it. Doesn't really appeal to my ears, but yeah. So just so we're absolutely clear, the Penang Babas are still 100% Baba and Nyonya, and by no way has Hokkienization diluted them. That's not what I'm trying to imply, but it's personally not a topic I would choose, but you know, I understand that how you perceive the language might not be the way I perceive it, because it sounds guttural to me because I don't understand it. But maybe, you know, if I actually heard it more, perhaps I might change my mind. I just don't hear it at all in PJ, where I was forced to live as a result of my grandfather's posting by Shell in the 1960s, which sealed my fate before I was even born. Yes. Anyway, there are legitimate concerns, however, that the some Baba Nyonya members of the community have, especially the Penang Babas and Nyonyas, because when the government stated that they would recognize the Malacca Babas first, and next year the other Baba Nyonyas would be recognized, there was a bit of anxiety in some members of the Penang Baba Nyonya community, because they worried that perhaps they might be, the implied message is that Malacca is the gold standard while Penang is the diluted offshoot. That's what many people in the Peranakan community of Penang seem to wonder. Like, are we now the diluted cousin, the Sinkified cousin, the cousin that has lost his roots, so to speak? And I say no. I say your roots just developed differently. I may not like the sound of Hokkien, but that's my perception. I'm not disrespecting you as a person, but you know, it doesn't mean that you are any less Peranakan just because you speak a different language from the Peranakans in Malacca or Terengganu or Kelantan. If anything, you developed organically, and basically the Hokkiens did not force their language down your throat. As I mentioned, you learned it through osmosis, and you learned it through intermarriage with Hokkien people. And this is a successful form of hybridization So, you know, I may never understand, or it may never appeal to me, the sound of Hokkien may never really appeal to me, but having said that, however, I respect the Penang Babas for maintaining their continuity despite all the osmosis into the Hokkien world, basically. So I would say that they do have a right to be concerned, because the government said that only Malacca Babas would be recognized initially, while the Penang Babas as well as the Terengganu and Kelantan Babas would have to wait until next year. But the implied message, I think, to many Baba Nyonyas is that Malacca is the gold standard, while the rest of them are mere offshoots. Which is crazy, because the Terengganu Babas and Nyonyas are just about as old as the Malacca Babas and Nyonyas. You know, they can trace their history back hundreds of years as well. So yeah, I'd say that, you know, this is just bureaucratic, nothing to fret about. By next year, we can indeed register ourselves as Baba and Nyonya. But I just wanted to say that with or without official documentation, with or without paperwork, I think that the Baba Nyonyas should have the confidence in order to acknowledge ourselves as a unique and separate group from the wider Chinese diaspora. We shouldn't have to wait for government recognition, we shouldn't have to wait for diaspora approval, and we certainly should not have to wait for the approval of the wider Malaysian society in order to identify ourselves by what we are. And our identity predates even the identity of the Malaysian state. We have been here for hundreds of years, and we have successfully blended culture, language, and practices into a successful hybrid identity. And our historical continuity goes back centuries. Now, it doesn't matter whether your ancestor got off the boat in 1839 or 1639 or 1539. What matters is that as Babas and Nyonyas, we are indeed the most successful example of a cosmopolitan Malaysian identity, you know. And to be honest, I don't think Tan Cheng Lock, the first president of the MCA, would have really approved of this official categorization, or I doubt he would have really approved of Babas and Nyonyas considering themselves to be a special group, because, you know, from Tan Cheng Lock's perspective, you know, within a couple of decades, he'd hoped everybody would just be Malayan. And well, the Babas and Nyonyas, from his point of view, were the proto-Malayans, basically. But it never happened, basically. But I don't think that Tan Cheng Lock would have really cared for any separate category, because he knew who he was, right? So for those of you who say, for example, that I can't call myself Peranakan because I'm only half on my mum's side and my surname is Wong, or if, let's say, you say that I'm only a quarter, don't listen to the stupid gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers have a piss-poor memory of what the Baba and Nyonya identity really is supposed to be. An identity of pluralism, an identity of hybridity, and not an identity of purity. So if, for example, you say that you're only a quarter, so you can't call yourself Peranakan because some gatekeeping bureaucrat with a notebook has deemed you unworthy due to your blood quantums, I think these Peranakan Nazis have simply forgotten that their own ancestors didn't have formal paperwork for the identity. People didn't even start calling themselves Baba or Nyonya until the 19th century. So, as I mentioned in the previous video, they would just have called themselves Orang Tempatan, people from here, right? Paperwork's not important, blood is not even important, but what's important is ethos. the way you view the world and the way you conduct yourself and the way you carry yourself in the world. That is truly what makes you Baba or Nyonya. But just to wrap up this video, at the end of the day, all of us are still Malaysians, and I certainly do not want to give people the impression that I'm elevating myself above the rest of the wider Chinese Malaysian community. I might see the world differently from you. I might center my identity on Nusantara, not on China, and I certainly don't have the same anxieties about Chinese identity lost as you do, because, well, my ancestor got off a boat almost 300 years ago, so there's nothing to lose since my ancestor cut ties with China centuries ago. But, you know, I do respect how you would like to maintain the continuity of your culture. In the same way, I'd like to maintain the continuity of mine, you see. That's why I'm scrambling for resources in order to relearn whatever Baba Malay I might have lost. Because believe it or not, my grandfather did speak it back at home. There's this idea that Penang Peranakans cannot speak Baba Malay, but I still remember bits and scraps of how my grandfather sounded, like lu tarok ini sini kat ini. So I also want to maintain the continuity of my civilization, and I maintain my own civilization's integrity, and so do you, for your own. But you know, at the end of the day, whether you're Malay, Baba, Hokkien, Hakka, Teochew, Cantonese, Hainanese, Hokchew, whatever, or Tamil, Sikh, Chetty, at the end of the day, everyone's identity and everyone's cultural integrity should indeed be respected. That's why you don't see me clutching at straws anymore to argue against vernacular schools, because I might not like some of your methods. I might consider your methods rather draconian when raising and disciplining children, but I do acknowledge the sincerity you have in preserving your culture. That's why I might not like the way you do it, but at the end of the day, you know, you stay in your lane and I'll stay in mine. You see what I mean? In fact, the successful intermingling between Hokkiens and Babas and Nyonyas in Penang is proof that pluralism and tolerance for each other's cultures works. You know, there's no need to convert or win over anyone to either one side. We just need to respect everybody's autonomy to have their own cultural and historical identity. And ultimately, we're all still Malaysians, and what we should be pushing for is for, well, I don't really like borrowing Lee Kuan Yew's words, because I might have his accent but not his values, for a Malaysian Malaysia, by which I don't mean some technocratic Mandarin dog-eat-dog sort of society, but a Malaysia that works for everyone, not just a Malaysia that works for some, but for all. And ultimately, I think that the Malaysian government, in recognizing our unique Peranakan identity, has taken a good first step towards this Malaysian Malaysia. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.